Hi, everyone. Good. Glad you're all here. Thanks for being here. So today we will be touching base on the reading a little bit that you did in Kenya. And we will honestly hold most of the conversation until next week when we read another chapter on large-scale health cases in Peru. That was work that was led by our team, Future Generations Peru. So we'll kind of look at those two cases side by side. But at this point, I just want to open the floor if you want to share any reactions that you had about that reading. It was a classic example of, of really promising work that did not ultimately take root at scale as hoped.
In a word, does anybody want to try to Rosie's question, explain what basically happened? What happened in the Kakamega case that led to as the title of that chapter is A Promising Start Derailed. Well, what happened to derail things? Maher.
Hi everyone. So yeah. From that chapter, I think the most important thing or like finding for me is like how we need to focus on the process, and also that like the community is like the main I call it like the main player or the main like decision maker, because from that example how they started with the two different districts and in more than like 80 communities. And I have a question, like if we have information, how big was like the community in that time to understand like the context, but how they started working on the different issues by making the community itself suggesting ideas and solution, and like finding like who will lead like the process there. And the most important thing, how this model worked like for more than 2 decades. But when like the Kenyan government and like the healthcare ministry tried like to use or implement the same idea in different places, they failed by bringing like the let's say the donors and like the external people to support like the community. But those people, they take like the or they took the let's say the decision making and the process from the community itself, and like that they lost like the ownership, and the community took like step back. And then this example is like failed, or at least for me it's like still like big inspiration. And I started like thinking how I can maybe get inspired from that example. So this for me, like the most important thing is like we need to focus on the process, like the community itself. And if we have like external support, those external support, they have to respect the community and like to not underestimate like the community and its power. So those like few words how I saw the story from Kakamega. It's very hard to pronounce the name of the city. Yeah.
Thank you, Maher. Very, very articulate answer. Does anybody else want to jump in and also add to Maher's answer? I know Daniel has some notes, but before we jump in on Daniel, does anybody else also try to answer that question? Irfani.
In this project, that was very important for me. they tried to say to the people, you should go ahead without external support, and you should find or collect the money from the local resource. And the first, it was a little strange for the people, and after the outsider experts described how the people can gather the money, the people try to find the ways for gathering the money, and they find 2 or 3 ways to gather the money from the local resource. And after that, they try to define the priority of the people in the local, and the priority, the primary needs in health sector and other sectors. And also they try to define the border between communities. They could collect the data based on this method. This was the important fact in this project. The people took an important role in this project.
Thank you, Irfani. Now, Daniel, I know you had some comments on this chapter.
Well, the Kristen's comment on the chat and the other 2 comments, I'm going to hold off. I want another good feedback from somebody in the group, because I do have something to share. But folks, you're on a roll, so somebody else.
Somebody unmute and jump in, whether it's to vocalize what you put in the chat or just speak up if you haven't entered in the chat, but you have something to share.
Just to build off my comment, I think both the outside in, top down oversteps their boundaries eventually and played outside of their role. One thing that was interesting to me, I think both had the thought of good intentions of doing things that were going to be serving the community from their perspectives. And really, I think we've talked about it in class, but how dangerous that can be and harmful to the community, and not including that voice of the bottom up. And I think that ultimately put an end to the momentum that they did have.
Matt, that's great. If I haven't said it to this particular group, I like to say that, the path to failed development project is paved with good intentions. But it doesn't mean that, that doesn't necessarily make it okay, right? But it definitely tends to be the case. So absolutely, you see these failed programs, and it's never for lack of trying, but the end result can be depressing. Herman.
Hello, professors, dear professors, good morning, and our classmates. And I have one question. In our reading, the Kenya's project, the Kakamega's project, achieved worldwide recognition. I understand it was a model, I think, in Almata primary health meetings. But in the review, we read the 3-way partnership never started, and the community and experts was disempowered. And who disempowered? This is my question. I didn't get the answer. Who is empowered to the community and the experts, to the experts?
Let me jump in with a little bit more information. Miriam Weary, who wrote this chapter, is a good personal friend. Based on this experience that she had at Kakamega, she became world famous. And she even tried to run to be head of the World Health Organization, WHO, okay, as the representative from Africa, okay? And so you're talking about a project, you're in this project, you have really a rather famous project, especially in the 1970s and 1980s. And this is one of the few case studies in the book that talks about failure. Most of the stories, the case studies you've been reading, we're talking about seed scale being successful. I think perhaps we should, when we rewrite the book again, which is Just and Lasting Change, it's the second edition. The third edition is being requested at some point when we get some time. We should have more failures in the book. But the key problem that has been identified by all of you, or Herman's question of why failure, it's the role of control versus partnership. And you have said it, okay? In many of your responses. And Matt talked about good intentions. People with good intentions are especially likely to use their good intentions to try to fix something, okay? Rather than to let this process work. So this leads me to a really simple point that was made at the beginning by Maher. He didn't use these words, but this was Maher's, what I think you were trying to say. The difference between a project and process. Maher was talking about the importance of process. Most people looked at Kakamega as a project. There is a very, very big difference, because a project is something that is being run by the outside. It is being controlled with money. And process means that you are a partner in making change happen. You are listening rather than telling, okay? Instead of control, you are doing cooperation, okay? Or it's the point Kristen made, it's target rather than a partner, okay? When somebody is making a target, they think you're too stupid or too weak or too ignorant to be a partner. None of us are too ignorant or too stupid. We're all doing what Matt said with good intentions the best we can. So use that resource. Folks, your answers are great. I'm just trying to here to summarize the points you've been making. Luke, back to you.
Great. And I think there's another interesting thing, kind of, if you look at when Daniel talks about failure. And as we think about this, we're from a theoretical perspective, we're in the arena of scale cubed right now in the course. And one thing we will talk a lot about is how the role of scale squared in helping to drive and fuel this cube dynamic. And one thing that happened in this case was they initially were all set to become a scale squared center. And with that came a lot of fame. And this is something to really be wary of looking back at scale squared. We didn't cover this, but this case really helps. Is that I have seen on so many occasions scale squared centers that over time got a really big ego about themselves because they start to think that everything in their community is perfect. And what they realize is gradually they stop becoming a scale squared center because they stop experimenting. They just start teaching. They stop learning from the people who are coming to visit them. And so this is another interesting thing. In Kakamega, it was largely externally driven. But Daniel knows this can happen quite often. Someone comes in, as was correctly said, at the beginning of this case, they didn't have any money. And so it was all based on the community paying salaries, the community driving the process. And the government stepped in and started to hand out money. Well, at that point, the energy dissipated. So terrific job. Thank you, everybody. Rosie, I think we're probably going to turn our attention now away from the case, but thank you all. That was a very rich discussion.
Yes. So just to, carry forth on our transition to talk about your community lab, I'm so glad that, Meher, you said this was inspiring, and I hope for others it can be too, of being super careful to listen as a partner as you are actively receiving feedback from the community stakeholders you're working with. So we now want to spend a little bit of time in breakout groups so that you can check in with your classmates about where you're at in the process and specifically what questions you have. So hopefully everyone can share, but don't feel like you need to present it all in a formal way right now. Really, we want you to come together, talk about the problems you're having, and try to help one another. And then we will come back together as a large group so that you can share whatever problems or question you haven't been able to resolve on your own. Does that make sense?
Exactly. Walk through as a group, each of you. How are you feeling about this? What are the things that are catching you up or being specific challenges, and work together, help one another to address those. And as we've done in previous classes, for the really hard questions, if there are points that you all are all collectively struggling with, bring those back, and we will save some time as a large group so that maybe the groups can help one another, and certainly we as faculty can probably help you, or at least we hopefully can.
This breakout group time is probably going to be shorter than you want. So make sure nobody dominates the breakout group and talks too much, because you're coming back and we've got some more exciting talk to do.
You only have about 15 minutes, so that gives each of you maybe 3-4 minutes tops.
Yep. All right. You should be getting your invites right now. All right, we're all back.
Great. Well, how'd your discussions go? Did everybody got it all figured out, or there's some questions?
Definitely from our group across the board, a problem that we're all having is participation and meeting fatigue with people. It's just a common theme right now that participation is inconsistent, and it's kind of difficult to get people to attend. So that's one thing.
Good one, Kristen. And I can only imagine. I'm seeing some of that myself. What did the other groups run into this? I think that this is a really good one, because I'd be interested. Is this something the other groups discussed? And does anybody have did any groups come up with any suggestions for how we could get around, or how do you address this situation? Irvani?
Yes, we discussed in our group, and we are 3 member today. All of us are working still on step 1 and step 2. Some of us shared the strategy from community lab 2 to the partners and is still waiting to get feedback from partners and other stakeholders. And some of us are working on to define the exactly activity and timeline and resource for this project for our community. But there are some problems like security problems for Fabian. She cannot go to the community. Maybe she tell you with more details, and also about the resource. And I'm also thinking how to find enough resource to expand the activity of Women Empowerment Center. I designed to make a local or international network to support the Women Empowerment Center in Gauharshat. We need to find more donors and sponsors to help this center.
Great. So it sounds like, just to get back to what I think group 1 had mentioned, this issue of really having some problems getting community engagement and participation. You mentioned that most members of your group, it sounds like, are also having some trouble with that if you're mainly waiting to get feedback from group members. And as you also mentioned in your group, there is not just fatigue and shutdown from COVID, but that in both Haiti and Afghanistan, I know there is extreme violence right now. And so that is, I'm sure, making it even harder for access. You also raised the very good point of accessing resources. So to build on our first 2 responses, did any of the groups also reflect or echo this point of having trouble with engagement or resource scarcity? And especially, did any groups happen to talk about possible solutions to this? Let's hear from some of the other groups. We want to get the different groups talking to one another. What, you know, in terms of whether it's finding points of commonality or also seeing if any solutions emerged in those smaller discussions. Melchade.
In our group, we raised a concern about the feedback from partners. When we share scenario planning to relevant partners, their feedback may not align, and this can undermine the process of scaling up, because if a partner, if the feedback partner is not considered, a partner may be disinterested, and this can undermine the process of scaling up, and it is a challenge. And in the group, Albert raised a problem of technology. Actually, meeting minutes is not taken. They share the point of view by WhatsApp. And how can we take WhatsApp message as evidence. How we can take those messages as evidence. And Maher raised a problem about COVID in his country. He has difficulty to reach the partners. Okay, that is what we discussed.
Great. Well, just to build on that, so it sounds like, once again, this point of partnership engagement, whether it's as a result of security, whether it's a result of COVID, whether it's a result of just the overall fatigue. I think one point that kind of what I heard, and I don't think she expressly said it, but one thing I felt kind of Kristen implied was that people are really maybe worn out with these virtual sessions. And Melchiade, you highlighted that in terms of saying, you know, as we're working in these virtual spaces, the communication is happening on WhatsApp Messenger, it's happening on Facebook. It's really hard to track. Daniel, do you have any recommendations for the group?
Right. This is actually a very big deal. And it's really important that we've listened to you rather than just keep talking as professors. Okay? So it's the partnership point very clearly. When you have fatigue, there are many reasons why the fatigue is happening. Insecurity, COVID, too much, not enough time, no incentives, so on and so forth. The fatigue is real and you can't fight it. Okay? Now, one of the factors here is that this is an assignment for your course. Okay? You're trying to do something that benefits you. And the community needs something that benefits them. And so right now, the loyalty is actually, this whole assignment is totally circling around you. Where you say, oh, my professor needs this, I need this to get my course. And the community says, I'm sorry, my family is being shot at, as in Afghanistan or Haiti. My mother has COVID, as in some of the rest of your situations. I'm sorry, your course is not that important. So what the answer here? And this is, we're in an extreme situation in 2021. But the answer here that you need to take forward as things get better this year and next year, the message from this course is you've always got to be focusing on the community, on your partners, not on yourself. Go back to the Kakamega example. Something was wonderful was happening in Kakamega. And it wasn't the fatigue problem. It was everybody wanted to take credit for Kakamega. UNICEF wanted to take credit. The government wanted to take credit. And so they forgot the partnership with the community. It was the partnership with the community that's important. So if fatigue is happening, in order to achieve the process rather than the project, in order to achieve cooperation rather than control, you've got to be working with their priorities at their time. As my professor said, many, many decades ago when I was doing my graduate work, scratch where the community itches, not where you itch. Okay? So what am I saying here? If the problem is COVID, if the problem is community, if the problem is fatigue, how can you make this process fun for the people? How can you grow the human energy? Because if you don't have human energy growing, you've got community energy going down. It goes either this way, it goes that way. It's almost impossible to keep human energy flat. Okay, so more important than anything is to figure out what will cause your human energy to grow and document that as your lab assignment, as part of your lab assignment. Okay, it may be having everybody bring some food to the meeting. No, can't do bring the food to the meeting. That's the old one that I used to use. Can't bring food to the meeting because it's on Zoom, and WhatsApp is very bad. It's moving a sandwich from one place to another. So what can you do? Show a movie that's interesting? What can you do to grow the human energy? And then you will be breaking it down fatigue, and you will be getting the team working as a partner, and you will be getting a process going rather than a project. Luke, back to you.
Thank you, Daniel. So as Daniel said, what you really want to do is keep the sense of hope going. You want to make this as fun as possible. If people are feeling fatigued, you also want to make it as easy as possible. And so one thing that I often do when I run into people who are just clearly fatigued is this goes back to the very first principle of seed scale, building on success. And it's important to celebrate the successes you've already achieved. And that I don't mean, have a party, because as Daniel said, that you can't really do that right now. But for instance, if you have a meeting that is largely based on basically saying, look at everything we've already accomplished. Because step 3 of this program says analyze your action plan. Well, the whole point here, one of the quickest ways people become fatigued is they talk themselves to death. And it's exhausting. And you get tired of going to meetings because you say nothing is getting done. Even if you know that things are getting done, it doesn't feel that way. So one of the things you can do very quickly is reflect upon the successes you've already made and make decisions. In your next meeting, say, look, here is what we have. I've gone back over all of our previous points, and here's what we have collectively decided as a group. Here is the plan moving forward. Even if you do most of the work, everybody else is feeling tired. You have to do the work because you're in a course here. But in most cases, you have to just do the work anyway if you want to see at this stage, if you're trying to be a meaningful facilitator. And there's nothing like making some decisions, not having a meeting to validate the decisions, but start the meeting by saying, we have collectively already decided the following. And so the plan moving forward, so that they feel like we're going somewhere. That sense and doing that based on here's what we've accomplished. These are things that can start to make people feel re-engaged because it's very clear that this is moving, this is going somewhere. And that's a lot of what this assignment, where you all are, the transition from activity step 2 to activity step 3, is saying, move from a strategic conversation with these folks to a decisive plan of action. And one of the main reasons you do that, go back to 601, and we talked about the work plan. You will lose momentum for an idea or a project if it just stays an idea. You have to make it real. You have to ground it, and you have to ground it within your own experiences as fast as possible. Daniel, did you want to jump in on that?
Yeah. When Luke said, go back to principle 1, building on success, we had a very interesting experience a few days ago, 10 days ago here. Every 4th Tuesday, the Future Generations World Team gets together on a Zoom meeting. And we had a presentation by one of the most successful practitioners of seed scale. His name is Nawang Gurung. He's from Nepal. And he's been doing seed scale for many years. And he's on our team. And he said that he uses now, not build from success, but find the success. And I talked to Nawang after his presentation. I said, nobody's ever used that, Nawang. He says, oh, I've been using that for 20 years. Find the successes. And I said, well, it gets especially interesting when you translate the word find into Nepali or into Hindi, because Nawang has worked in both India and Nepal and China, because the word find is a much more interesting word than build. Okay, it's this scratching where it itches idea. Okay, it's getting inside. And so work with this idea. Don't just follow this seed scale like a formula. 1, 2, 3, 4. Get inside the momentum. Luke, we have another question for the group. Or Rosie, you had a question?
No, I was just checking the time. We've got a couple more minutes. We have time for one more question.
We do. I think the other point that came forward is the issue of identifying resources.
Mhm.
And I don't know that that's such a big topic. I don't know that we have a ton of time for it, aside from saying that it's very important. But as Daniel will tell you, with money, you're looking for a scarce resource. And so it's important, and you need to do it, and especially at the phase of scaling up money is influential. But also think, Irfani and others, about this point of finding the successes. Because often, if you're working in that area, I have found that resource and finding resources is always much easier when you're trying to find it for something that you're doing and you can show and you talk about as something that you're doing, versus an idea. It's very hard to find people who are willing to put physical resources behind something that is still in the strategic or idea phase. And that is one reason why at Seed Scale we say use human energy to get action going. And from that, then go and find the resources, because normally it's much easier to find them if you're clearly already doing something, because you also have a very clear sense of how you can cobble together different diversified resource allocations.
Mhm.
There are resources in the successes that are making the successes happen. And so you're growing those seeds. But this issue of resources is really important for another reason. You all need money so you can survive. Okay? You can't be a volunteer for the rest of your lives. I get it. So you have to figure out how the process can support you. And that is certainly, that is the answer to that will be individualized to everything, but it's necessary that this process supports each of you. The process cannot ask each of you to be a volunteer forever. So how does the process support you? How does the partnership support you? How does the evidence give you an argument for the resources? Fortunately, this is not the last class. So we're going to get some of these answers as we go forward.
Absolutely. And if you want to talk through the specifics of your project more, please come by office hours on Monday or reach out, schedule another time. All right, with that, thanks so much for being here, and we'll see you next week.
And I, by the way, folks, am going to a meeting to plan the commencement ceremony for this year's master's class. I'm looking forward to the time when each of you is part of one of these commencement ceremonies. But I am going now to a meeting to plan something special for the graduates from earlier classes. So we're working together.
Woohoo!
Thanks, y'all.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.